Welcome to this episode of Rather Than the Bars. I'm Eddie Conway, coming to you from Baltimore for the Real News Network. We have been following the struggle of ex-felons in Florida to win their right to vote. What we know at this point is that 1.4 million ex-felons are affected. After Amendment 4 was passed, the Florida state government decided to put restrictions on the right for felons to vote, force the felons to pay their fines or their court costs and whatever other fees that they owed before they could actually exercise that right to vote. Over 85,000 ex-felons had registered to vote. The voting is gonna happen in 100 days from now. The case went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court supported this Florida poll tax, and it won't be appealed until August 18th. And on August 18th is the day that actually Florida's go to vote. So at least 85,000 votes are in limbo right now. This is going to have an impact on the Florida election, which is a very crucial election. If y'all remember the Bush-Gore election, how it turned on Florida's vote. We got a similar situation right now. So joining me today to kind of like talk about the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court decision, is Phil Tarfayan. He's the Director of Equal Justice Under the Law. Phil, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Eddie.
Okay, Phil, kind of explain what this Supreme Court vote means and what's going to happen.
Well, what the Supreme Court has done this month is completely lawlessness. You're exactly right, Eddie. With Amendment 4, a supermajority of Floridians overwhelmingly approve the right of everyone in Florida to vote, including people with prior felony convictions, as long as those people had finished serving their prison sentence and had also finished any probation or parole. The state legislature and the governor have been fighting that voter initiative tooth and nail ever since it was passed. And what the Supreme Court has effectively done has said, despite what the voters have said, despite what a federal court has said, up to 1 million people in Florida aren't going to be able to vote in the upcoming primary and possibly in the general election in November.
How will that impact any particular community? Because I understand that the felons that have won their right to vote equally spread between Republicans and Democrats. What's significant about that block of voters losing their rights? I mean, other than the fact that you should have your right to vote.
Exactly. I mean, there's the fundamental unfairness of someone who's already repaid their debt to society being denied the right to vote, regardless of their party affiliation. But what's going on in Florida is a little more specific. Right now, there are about 1.4 million people in Florida who have prior felony convictions. Well, those who are wealthy enough to pay off their court debt, which might be about a third of that, maybe 400,000 or 500,000 of that 1.4 million, they're able to vote. What really is at issue with the Supreme Court right now is almost 1 million Floridians who have prior felony convictions and are simply too poor to pay off their court debt. That's the group, almost 1 million people who can't vote. That's a group that skews in terms of poverty. It's people who are too poor to pay court debt, and it's going to skew along racial lines. It's predominantly African-American people who are being denied the right to vote right now. So it's going to affect people who are poor, and it's going to affect racial and ethnic minorities much more. That could really impact the election, especially when we're talking about Donald Trump running for re-election, who has not been a friend at all to African Americans or other racial and ethnic minorities. So you're seeing almost 1 million people right now whose voting rights are in limbo.
Okay. With the current situation with Trump trailing by X amount of percentage points in the poll. Why is the Florida election so significant?
Florida is going to be significant for a lot of reasons here. First, you've got a Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, who is very unpopular in some communities in Florida. That's going to be a key issue in this election when Donald Trump is seeking re-election. And of course, as we know, Florida's always been a swing state at the presidential level. Going back to 2000, when it turned on just a couple hundred votes, the butterfly ballot in Palm Beach, and so forth. Bush versus Gore was such a close election, and it really turned on Florida. I think we'll see a similar outcome here. Right now, Donald Trump is trailing in Florida. People in Florida seem to be fed up with everything Donald Trump has done and his failures across the board as a president. But things tend to get close in Florida come November. And what could be a disadvantage for Trump now could get closer, and it could become a very even race. Now, I will say, Eddie, from what I'm seeing on polling across the country, Donald Trump is struggling in a lot of regions in the country. When you look at Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, also Florida, even states like Texas, a lot of people are turning against Trump. So this could turn into an election where Florida is decisive, but it may not. I think what Donald Trump is thinking is he needs Florida to win. And as he has said, in order to win in a state like Florida, he needs a lot of folks not to be voting. Many of those folks are some of the 1 million people who have prior felony convictions right now who can't vote. I think Donald Trump is banking on those 1 million people not voting in November.
Well, talk a minute about this appeal that's supposed to happen about the Supreme Court decision on August 18th. That's the day of the primary. Is that too close for those ex-felons that have registered to vote? Is that too close to that day to allow them the opportunity to vote?
It may be, given the Supreme Court's refusal to intervene. Right now, the entire outcome is in the hands of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. The 11th Circuit is an appellate court just below the Supreme Court. They set the hearing date for August 18th, just about 4 weeks from now, which, as you say, Eddie, is the same day as the primary in Florida. Right now, there are 85,000 people who have registered to vote, but they have prior felony convictions and outstanding court debt. Those individuals will likely not be able to vote in the primary. But those 85,000 plus up to 1 million others could still vote in November at the general election as long as the Court of Appeals acts quickly enough. Really what needs to happen is the Court of Appeals will hear arguments on August 18th, and they need to issue a decision as soon as possible after that. As long as their decision comes out quickly, people still have until October 5th to register to vote for the November election. The general election in November is really the key date. And the Court of Appeals sometimes acts quickly, but sometimes it acts slowly. But that decision needs to come out in September in order to give people time to register to vote in October for the November election. Time is running out, though. This election is less than 100 days away. And people need clarity on whether they're going to be allowed to register and then whether they're going to be allowed to vote in November.
Okay, can you kind of like tell me, is there a possibility that this could set a precedent for other states to roll back the right for ex-felons? Like Maryland won the right, a number of states have won the right for their ex-felons to vote, and now with these restrictions, fines, court costs, etc., is this something that can spread to other states? Is this maybe a new form of voter suppression that we need to look at into the future?
That's exactly the worry, Eddie, is that what the 11th Circuit does, the Court of Appeals in this case, could be a precedent across the country. Right now, it's considered a constitutional right to vote, and that your wealth or poverty cannot be a factor. We passed an amendment to the Constitution saying there should be no poll taxes because we've seen a lot of states trying to discriminate based on wealth status and poverty status. The 11th Circuit can roll back all those protections and take us back over 100 years into an age where people who were simply poor were not being able to vote. That would be a huge setback and could set a precedent across the country. Now, there is some good news to that. All of what's happening in Florida is being driven by a Republican governor who doesn't want to see people voting just because they're poor. Not all governors share that sentiment. When you look at, for example, in Virginia, the governor there is trying to expand the right to vote, even if people have unpaid court debts. You look at other states looking to increase people's access to the polls. States will always be able to do that regardless of what the 11th Circuit does. What I'm worried about is the Court of Appeals arming governors who are trying to lessen voter turnout. The 11th Circuit could give those governors a tool that would effectively suppress voters. But governors who want to see voter turnout, high voter turnout, they'll always have the power to do that regardless of what the Court of Appeals says.
Okay, so is it possible for us to have you back once the Court of Appeals renders a decision so we can at least get an update and know exactly what the situation is?
Absolutely. I'll be watching closely on August 18th to the arguments and keeping my fingers crossed that the Court of Appeals moves quickly after that, and would love to talk again, Eddie.
Okay, Phil, do you have any last words or things you would like to say to either the ex-felons or the community at large in reference to this issue?
So what I would say for people in Florida is two things. One, if you have a prior felony conviction right now and are unsure of your right to vote, register. Now, you may not be allowed to register. You may be turned away. One thing you should know is that if you go ahead and vote, despite the court's ruling, the governor may try to prosecute you. So registering itself is not a crime. The governor is taking the view that if you vote illegally, that you could be subject to prosecution. But registering is a first step, and everyone should go out and register. The second thing is whether you have a prior felony conviction or whether you know someone who has a prior felony conviction, write to the governor. This is all happening because of Governor DeSantis in Florida. He's the one who's trying to restrict access to the polls. Of course, we hope the federal courts get it right. But if Governor DeSantis actually took a stand and supported people's right to vote, this wouldn't even be an issue. So send letters to the governor and tell the governor you want to see your relatives, your neighbors, your friends out at the polls this November.
Okay, Phil, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Eddie.
And thank you for joining this episode of Rather Than the Bars for the Real News.